Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you? Well, today's topic is healthy versus unhealthy thinking styles. Okay, so basically, what I want to do is to kind of make us more aware of what this looks like. Okay, so with that awareness, we have the power to change our thinking. So, our thoughts are very strongly related to our feelings and also the eventual actions that we take. So, if we're able to make our thoughts more healthy, then we have better chance of feeling better and also taking more effective action. Okay, so this is kind of an important topic if you think about it. All right, so it's going to give us a little more insight into what's going on in our mind. Okay, so here we go: unhealthy versus healthy thinking. All right, so we're going to start with the negative and move to the positive. All right, so unhealthy thinking styles, stinking thinking styles. There's two main categories of unhealthy thinking that are identified, okay? So one is, they call it chaos, and the other is rigidity, all right? So we're gonna break this down and talk about what this means, okay? So a chaotic thinking style, think about a chaotic situation where things seem turned upside down, there's no order, there's not a lot of meaning, things are kind of scattered, right? And sometimes our thoughts feel that way, right? In an extreme, it could be like psychotic thinking, right? Because psychotic thinking is, not very realistic. It's disorganized. It's kind of scrambled up. There's what they call loose associations, where one thought doesn't easily follow the next. Like, it's hard to follow the person when they're talking in a disorganized kind of a way. And another thing is tangential, which means like I'm talking about a subject and then I easily veer off onto another subject. Or what they call circumstantial, which means that I kind of drift off into something else and it takes me a long time to circle back around to my original point, right? I kind of like lose the thread of what I was talking about. And, I kind of am hard to follow because I'm a little all over the place, okay? I might jump from topic to topic because it's hard to stay focused. I might have what they call a flight of ideas. So the thoughts come really fast and random and all different ideas kind of flow out, right? And the thoughts may not be very based in reality. Okay, so in the extreme, it could be a delusional thought, or it could just be a really distorted kind of thinking, right? Maybe very emotional based thinking, right? So, although on the left side is more of a psychotic style, on the right side, if you look at that list, that's more emotional based thinking, right? So when our emotions are really strong, the prefrontal cortex part of our brain, which is really the part that organizes our thinking, isn't really lighting up very much, so to speak. There's not as much blood flow and activity there. So when we're thinking from our emotional mind, our amygdala, our limbic system, our thoughts are not as clear and focused, okay? So emotional thinking, think of a time when you were feeling really emotional and how it was probably hard to focus. It was probably hard to think in a realistic way because our emotions were driving our thoughts, right? So if I feel like I'm really angry, for example, like the guy in the picture, I might feel like taking revenge is a good idea, or punching someone in the face is a good idea, or you're wrong and I should blame you, right? It's all based on my emotions, right? And it may not be the most functional way to think about something. I might have difficulty reasoning based on the full spectrum of information that could be available to me. I might be reasoning based on just my emotional information. And so therefore the decisions and actions I take may not be that effective, okay? My thoughts might feel like they're all over the place because my emotions are just scrambling my thoughts a little bit, right? It's hard to collect your thoughts sometimes when you're really emotional, very hard to focus on what you need to do, and we're easily distracted, right? So think of all these things as being a chaotic thinking style, right? So if you reflect on yourself, there might be some times when you find that your thinking does get a little chaotic. Or you might say, you know what? That sounds like me a lot of the time. Like, my thinking really is pretty chaotic a lot of the time, okay? So just notice that, all right? It's not right or wrong. It's just something to notice. And when we notice it, we could start to make some changes, okay? So just file that aside and, take that for a piece of information, okay? All right, so the next category, which needs a little more explanation, a little more detail, is rigidity, okay? So if you have a rigid thinking style, that's what this is talking about. So on the one hand, this slide's gonna talk about how sometimes we think our thoughts equal reality, right? We get very fixed on what we're thinking, and we're convinced that if I'm thinking it, it must be true, right? So if I think I'm a bad person, that means I'm a bad person, right? Or if I think I'm right, that must mean I'm right. Or if I think you're an idiot, that must mean you're an idiot, right? So that's very rigid. I'm treating my feelings as if they're the facts, or I'm treating my thoughts as if they're the facts. And it's very black and white. It's very, you know, rigid in terms of this is what I'm thinking and that must be true. Okay? And the problem with that is if you're convinced that your thoughts are real, you feel compelled to act on them, right? Even let's say in a psychotic manner, right? If someone's really paranoid and they feel like someone's coming after them, they feel compelled to act on that thought. So maybe they might attack that person before the person attacks them if they're convinced that the person's coming after them, right? So sometimes those actions can get us into trouble because we're very convinced about reality, but it's not the reality, okay? So this is one form of rigidity. Okay, another form of rigidity, right? So this is like more of the argumentative type. So when we're arguing, sometimes we tend to get very rigid, right? We get very stuck on our point of view and trying to make sure the other person hears our point of view, right? So if you find yourself getting argumentative or oppositional, right? If someone says something, you tend to dig your heels in and say the opposite. If you keep defending yourself because it's hard to let in other information, you might automatically say no, even if you haven't fully heard it, but you just know you need to say no to it, or insist that you're right, okay, in the absence of being open and flexible enough to take in other information, okay? So think about like that kind of mode, if that sounds familiar sometimes, okay? That's another version of rigidity. Here's even a third version, okay? So let's look at these statements together, right? So think of like a one-track mind. I think they're trying to make this brain look like a CD. So think of like a track on a CD that keeps playing the same track over and over again, right? So if you're rigid in this matter, you can't think anything you don't already believe. So if someone tries to present you with a different point of view or additional information or other perspectives, you can't take it in. You just keep playing that same track of thought over and over and over again, okay? Similarly, you can't imagine feeling anything you don't currently feel. It's kind of like if it's a beautiful day outside and they say tonight it's gonna rain, and you say, how could it possibly rain later? It's beautiful, the sun is shining, the sky is blue. How could it possibly change later, right? Sometimes when we're stuck in an emotion, it's just like that. It's like if I'm super depressed now, I can't possibly imagine that tomorrow I would feel different. It feels like I'm just gonna be depressed forever. That's how I always felt and how it's always gonna be, and it's probably not gonna change, right? So we get stuck in that feeling, right? And it could be you can't consider any perspective or course of action aside from the one you're committed to now, right? So it's impossible for me to put myself in someone's shoes and consider their perspective, right? Which could promote an argument even too, just like the other slide said. Or if I'm convinced that there's only one way to solve this problem, I might just keep going with that, even if it's going to create more problems, right? If I feel like someone dissed me and the only way to fix that problem is to teach him a lesson by punching him in the face, and I don't listen to anybody else's point of view or any other solutions, I might just go ahead and punch that guy in the face, right? I'm not allowing myself to explore other possibilities, okay? So that's another version of rigidity here. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. The term they call mind blind. Okay, so look at the picture on the left. It's like literally like you're walking around blind to other people's point of view. You can't put yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine life from their perspective. Okay, and that's a problem because good communication is reliant upon us being able to see things from points of view other than our own, right? Not everybody thinks the way we think or has a life experience like ours. So our inability to see things from other points of view can really get in the way, okay? So we might just like look at the outer surface and then implant our own views inside the person and assume they think like us, like we're of one mind, okay? But that's really not the reality, and that could get us in trouble, you know, in certain situations, all right? Okay, so now we're going to switch over to flexible thinking, okay? So Flexible thinking is the healthy version, right? So we talked about chaos and rigidity being unhealthy, right? And we talked about those and some of the problems that might come from that. So now this is what we're aiming for, okay? So this is the kind of thinking that is most productive for us, okay? So here we go. So when you're flexible, you're receptive, right? You're open to new information and perspectives, right? So it's like your mental door is opening, okay? That you're willing to welcome in other data, okay, from other people. So before, the rigidity is like keeping that door closed. Like, I think what I think and that's it, and I'm not going to change. This one's like, all right, well, let me consider something else. Oh, you have some extra information? All right, let me figure out how that fits into what I already feel. Okay, right? That's a little more flexible. So then we could think about a slinky, right, as a sign of flexibility. You could use a nice image like that, okay? And it's flexible attention. So let's say I don't get too rigidly focused into one thing, okay? Let's think of someone who's autistic, right? And they're stuck doing an activity, right? And someone says, okay, it's time to eat lunch. And they freak out because they can't interrupt what they're already doing. They're stuck doing one thing, right? So they call that shifting set. That's the technical term for executive functioning when you move from one activity to another and you're able to flexibly move between things. But if you get too focused on one thing and you can't deviate from it, that's a problem. So when you're flexible, okay, if I'm talking at this video now, that's fine. And then later I could move and do something else. And then I could come back to this, right? Or I'm doing homework and then I could eat dinner and then I could play a video game and then I can go back to doing homework, right? I'm kind of switching and being flexible, moving from one thing to another, okay? Or if I'm doing an activity and the phone rings, I can pick up the phone and talk and then I can get back to the activity, okay? And it's also knowing that it's okay to change your mind, that it doesn't have to be like you have to be loyal to the same thought or the same perspective forever and ever. When new information comes, you could change your mind and it's okay, right? So we have to give ourselves permission to be flexible. Okay, another aspect of flexible thinking is realizing that our thinking is what they call fallible, right? So basically that means like sometimes what we think isn't true. Sometimes we think things that are wrong and we could also change our mind, okay? So it's realizing that, like it says on the left, we see the world through our own mental filter, right? We don't see pure reality. We see reality filtered through our perspective, through our past experiences, through our emotions. And that because of that, I realize that I may not be seeing things 100% right, okay? And therefore, I could be open to changing it because I know my thinking isn't always accurate, okay? So I might believe things that are not true, and then someone might enlighten me to new information and I could change my mind. And it's realizing, you know, our beliefs can change over time. So think about it, like the things you might have believed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 1 month ago might be different from what you believe right now because your life experience changed, because the information you've gained since that time has changed, right? And that's okay. And also knowing that our knowledge is incomplete. So this prevents us from acting like we know it all, right? I already know it and I don't need to let in any new information. When I realize that I don't know everything yet and there's still more to learn, it helps me keep that door open, right? So if someone has something else to tell me, I can listen to it. Or if I read something new or watch a video of something new, I could let it in because I know I don't know everything. And information is changing all the time, right? So flexibility, right? So this is the healthy part. Okay, so don't freak out about this word. It's a little big. It's metacognition, right? So the root meta basically means like something above, right? It's like thinking about your thinking, right? So instead of just the thinking being inside the thoughts, I'm stepping back and thinking about the fact that I'm thinking, okay? So it's kind of like stepping back and saying, I wonder what my mind's doing right now. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, what kind of thought was that? Oh, it was a thought about what I'm gonna have for dinner tonight. Oh, it's a thought about what I'm gonna do this weekend. Huh, it's a thought about how I want to get revenge on somebody, right? So it's sitting back and watching the show, like the guy on the right. He has some popcorn and he's watching his thought bubbles, like he's watching them on a movie screen, okay? So giving ourselves that space to reflect on our thinking style, to reflect on what's going around through our mind is really helpful, okay? So we don't get as lost in it, right? We have a little more space so we could possibly change it, right? Or examine it, okay? So metacognition, really good sign of mental health. Okay, self-reflection, all right? Has anyone ever told you that it's important to develop insight, right? So self-reflection is necessary for developing insight. So it's, again, kind of a stepping back, right? Kind of reflecting upon ourselves, looking at our own thoughts, looking at our feelings, looking at our reactions from a little bit of a detached point of view where we're saying, oh, that's interesting. What was going on that day? Or what was I feeling? Or what's going through my mind right now, right? And reflecting upon it. And what meaning might that have? Oh, how does that relate to this? Oh, does it reflect my past experience? Is it making sense in this situation based on the triggers that are involved? Oh, that's interesting. Gee, I wonder how I could do it different next time, right? So it's reflecting on your personal experience, which requires also that stepping back. So metacognition and self-reflection are kind of related, okay? Okay, mindfulness, one of my favorite topics. So mindfulness has to do with three main things, right? It has to do with focused attention, like a broader stepping back and being aware of all the things that flow through your mind. And it also has to do with kind intention, right? So when we're being mindful of our thoughts, we're doing that broad stepping back from that seat of awareness, watching our thoughts come and go. And we gain insights into our thinking when we do this. So for example, like the top cartoon says, we realize, I know I'm not my thoughts, right? I'm actually much closer to being that place of awareness because there's always that part of me that's aware, and everything else floats in and out of my awareness, like clouds floating through the sky, right? And so I say, oh, there goes a thought, and that thought passes by. And then another thought comes, and that thought passes by. They're all impermanent, right? So therefore, I can't be my thoughts because my awareness is always there, and that's so much more permanent than my thoughts, okay? On the left, on the bottom, observing the fluctuations of the mind and do not become them, right? So I'm just noticing what my mind's doing. I'm not too wrapped up in my mind. I'm just watching the show, okay? And it says on the right, the mind will do what it wants to do, observe gently, okay? So we're not clinging to thoughts. We're not pushing thoughts away. We're not overly reacting. We're just saying, oh, my mind's always gonna think. So just let it think, here goes the thoughts, right? So I don't have to get too wrapped up in them, okay? See how that goes? Okay. So also a sign of health, sign of flexible thinking, is being able to take other perspectives. Remember when I talked before about unhealthy thinking, you could be mind blind, where you can't see someone else's point of view? Well, this is being able to take someone's point of view, right? So it's understanding that you and I could be in the same situation, looking at the same thing, but we both could see it differently, okay? Sometimes on my ward, right, I work in a hospital, there's 26 different patients, and there could be an incident, right? Maybe there's a fight. And all the people see it a little bit differently. Like if you ask them to each tell the story of what happened, each of the stories would be a little different, right? Because we all come at it with our own points of view. And it's important to realize that not everyone sees it like me, and they might have a different take on it, okay? And being open to listen to what other people have to say. So here's some concrete examples. So on the left cartoon here, if one person looks at that diagram, it looks like there's 4 sticks. But if you look at it from the right, it looks like there's 3. So if the person on the left put himself in the shoes of the person on the right, he'd realize, I know I see 4, but that other person sees 3. Even though I don't, he does, right? See how that is? In that middle diagram, that same cylinder reflects a square shadow on the left and a round shadow on the right. And they're both true, depending on which angle you come at it with. So if I'm the one who sees the square, I could also understand that other people might see a circle, even if I don't, okay? And just like on the right, one guy is deep into some water or quicksand or whatever that is, and the other guy isn't, right? But they both have their own experience of standing there. One guy sunk and one guy didn't, right? So it's important for them to understand each other's point of view, okay? Hope that makes sense to you guys. All right, so there's also flexible thinking involves understanding the appearance and reality distinction, right? So knowing that things can look one way on the surface, but actually be different, right? So if you go to buy a car and you have a very slick salesman, he might try to appear like he's a nice guy, but he really behind the scenes could be like a wolf in sheep's clothing trying to take advantage of you, right? Or if you meet some guy at a party and he seems like a cool guy, he really, if you pick up on certain signs, could be somebody who's trying to take advantage of you, right? So knowing when to look beyond the surface and see other things about somebody, right? So people might say things they don't mean. They might come across as nice, but really be a not so nice person. And they might deliberately disguise their internal states, right? Have everyone ever asked you how you're feeling? And you say, oh, I'm fine, but you totally weren't fine. And you kind of hid it on your face and you hid it in your words. If someone can see through that and know you're not fine, they are good at the appearance reality distinction, right? They're not just falling for what you put up on the surface. They're able to see through that and know there's more than meets the eye. Okay, so that's really important to grasp. All right. Empathy, right? So this is about also not being mind blind, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, see someone else's perspective, and even feel someone else's perspective, right? So there's a certain resonance that happens where I emotionally feel a little bit of what you're feeling, or I could even empathically, physically feel a little bit of what you're feeling, right? Sometimes if someone's sick, another person also has a little bit of sick feeling or a pain feeling themselves. Like they actually have a physical empathy, in addition to a cognitive empathy, thinking about what it might be like for the person. Okay, so all these are aspects of flexible thinking. Okay, and also, in addition to us trying to see how someone else is doing, we realize that others might have certain perceptions of us. And those perceptions may or may not match our own perceptions of us, that they might see things in us that we don't see. Because everyone has blind spots, right? And other people see things about us that we're blind to, okay? But it's also knowing that even if they see certain things about us, they can't read our mind. Some people like to tell us that they could read our mind, or they know what we're thinking, or they declare what we are or who we are or what's going through our mind. But deep down, we have to know that it's impossible for other people to really know that, right? That they can make assumptions, but they can never really come in and see ourselves, okay? And that if people respond to us in a certain way that seems off, we could realize that it's not personal, right? That everyone has their own stuff, their own emotions, their own history, their own biases that affect the way they see us, right? And this is a big deal because if you often take things personally or get offended very easily by people, it's really important to get this insight because then you won't take it as personally, right? So realize that, think about where it's coming from, like they say, right? This person has his own biases and he may not be seeing it accurately. At the same time, maybe there's certain parts that are true and certain parts that are not true, okay? And that, like I said before on the bottom, people may see you differently from how you see yourself, right? So they may not be wrong, but they might be seeing other things that we may not see, okay? So this is letting this other information in. Okay, and finally, flexible thinking means that we can rewrite our life story. Not that we could actually change concrete events that happened, but we could learn to think about it in a different way. Like if we tell ourselves a story about our childhood or the story about something that happened, it might be with a certain bias. It is going to be with a certain bias, right? We're telling it through a certain lens. And that lens may or may not be effective for us, right? We might be telling the same sob story over and over, or the same victim story over and over that's keeping us stuck in our life. But if we're thinking flexibly, we know that I could rethink those events and tell it to myself in a different and more empowering way. And that could actually have a positive influence on me now. Okay, I actually have a video that goes into this in a lot more detail, such as, I think it's called Transcending Our Personal Stories. So if you want to know more about this, I would definitely check out that video, okay? Because it's really an important skill for us to have. Okay, but basically, that's the deal, right? So chaos and rigidity, try to notice if those are part of your thought patterns. And now that you're aware of what flexible and healthy patterns are, try to incorporate more of those into your thought patterns, okay? Because the more flexible you are, the greater the sign of mental health and the more choices you have, the more empowering choices. Okay? So do a little cleanup up there. Okay? Try to clean out your mind, and good luck with all that. And I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye, everybody.